The courtroom was quiet that morning. The kind of quiet that feels heavy, like the air itself is holding its breath. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, catching dust motes as they floated lazily above rows of polished wooden benches. People sat scattered throughout the gallery. Some regulars who came for the drama, others family members waiting nervously for their loved ones' cases to be called. At the front, behind a raised bench, sat the magistrate. She was calm, composed, wearing the traditional black robe that gave her an air of quiet authority. Her eyes moved steadily over the docket in front of her, already deep into a long list of minor offenses. Traffic violations, small thefts, noise complaints. Nothing out of the ordinary. At least not yet. Then the bailiff called the next name. A woman walked in from the side door, escorted by a deputy. She wasn't in handcuffs, which meant this wasn't a felony case, probably a misdemeanor or a civil matter. But something about her made the room shift. It wasn't just her posture, stiff and defiant, or the way she refused to look at anyone. It was what she was wearing. Across the front of her plain white t-shirt in bold black capital letters were words that made several people in the gallery gasp. Others leaned forward, eyes wide. A few quickly looked away as if the sight itself was painful. The message was unmistakable, offensive, and deliberately provocative. It targeted an entire group of people with raw, unfiltered hatred. The magistrate didn't flinch. Not outwardly. But those who knew her well, her clerk, the court reporter, the veteran bailiff, saw the subtle tightening of her jaw, the slight pause before she looked up. She had seen plenty in her years on the bench. Angry outbursts, tearful confessions, manipulative lies. But this was different. This wasn't just disrespect toward the court. It was a public declaration of bigotry, worn like a badge right into the very room meant to uphold fairness and dignity for all. The woman took her seat at the defense table. Her lawyer, a young man who looked visibly uncomfortable, gave a small apologetic shrug toward the bench. He hadn't known she'd wear that shirt. Or maybe he had and didn't know how to stop her. Either way, he looked like he wanted to disappear. The charge was simple: disorderly conduct. She'd been arrested 2 days earlier after shouting at a group of teenagers outside a convenience store, using slurs and threatening language. The police report noted her shirt, the crowd that gathered, the fear in the kids' eyes. The prosecutor stood, ready to present the facts. But before he could speak, the magistrate raised a hand slightly. "Before we proceed," she said, her voice even, calm but carrying clearly through the silent room, "I need to address the attire of the defendant." The woman crossed her arms, chin lifted. "What about it?" "I got a right to free speech." "You do," the magistrate replied, "but you do not have a right to wear clothing that is disruptive, threatening, or prejudicial to the fair administration of justice in this courtroom. This is not a public park or a protest rally. This is a court of law, where every person, regardless of race, background, or belief, is entitled to equal treatment and respect." "I'm not hurting nobody," the woman muttered, though her eyes darted around, finally meeting the magistrate's gaze for the first time. "You are," the magistrate said gently but firmly. "You're hurting the integrity of this space. You're signaling to everyone here, especially those who've experienced discrimination, that this courtroom might not be safe for them. And that is unacceptable." She paused, letting the words settle. Then she turned to the bailiff. "Please provide the defendant with a courthouse gown." A courthouse gown was a simple, loose-fitting garment, usually navy blue or gray, used when someone's clothing was deemed inappropriate for court. It wasn't punishment. It was protocol. But in this moment, it felt like something more. The woman protested loudly as the bailiff approached with the gown. "This is censorship. You're silencing me." "No," the magistrate said. "I'm ensuring that justice can be served without intimidation. You'll have your chance to speak, but not while wearing a message that undermines the very principles this court stands for." Reluctantly, under the watchful eyes of the deputy, the woman pulled the offensive shirt over her head and slipped into the gown. She kept the shirt balled up in her lap. Like a trophy she refused to surrender. Once she was seated again, the magistrate nodded to the prosecutor. The case moved forward. Statements were read. The officer who made the arrest testified. The teen's written statements were entered into evidence. It was routine, almost dull, except for the tension still humming in the air. Everyone knew this wasn't really just about shouting outside a store. It was about what that shirt represented. It was about whether hate could walk freely into a place designed to protect the vulnerable. When it came time for the defendant to speak, she stood up, still clutching her shirt. "I didn't do nothing wrong," she said, voice sharp. "Those kids were loitering, being loud. I told them to move on. They started mouthing off. I got a right to defend myself." "Did you call them racial slurs?" the magistrate asked. "I said what I said," she replied, avoiding the question. "Did you threaten them?" "They felt threatened, maybe," she said with a shrug. "But I never touched nobody." The magistrate leaned back slightly, her expression unreadable. She wasn't angry, not in the way people expected. There was no shouting, no dramatic scolding. Instead, there was something deeper, disappointment maybe, or sorrow. She'd spent her career trying to believe that most people, given the right guidance, could choose better. But days like this tested that belief. She adjourned the case briefly, saying she needed a few minutes to review the law and consider her ruling. As she stepped into her chambers, the courtroom buzzed with whispers. People exchanged glances, shook their heads, some even wiped their eyes. It wasn't just about one woman's outburst, it was about what it said about the world outside these walls. Alone in her office, the magistrate didn't pace or slam doors. She sat at her desk, hands folded, eyes closed for a long moment. She thought about her own journey, growing up in a neighborhood where respect was earned through kindness, not fear. The mentors who told her she could be anything, even when others said no. The years of study, the late nights, the weight of the robe she now wore. She thought about the teenagers in the police report, probably scared to walk to the corner store now. And she thought about the woman in the gown, so full of anger she couldn't see the damage she was causing. When she returned to the bench, the room fell silent again, faster this time. She looked directly at the defendant. "What you did, wearing that shirt here, shouting slurs in public, it doesn't just break the law. It breaks something deeper. It tells people they don't belong, that they're less than. And in a society that's supposed to protect everyone equally, that's dangerous." The woman opened her mouth to argue, but the magistrate held up a hand. "I'm not going to fine you. I'm not going to jail you for a few days just to make a point. That won't change your heart, and it won't heal the harm you've caused." A murmur went through the room. That wasn't the usual sentence for disorderly conduct. Instead, the magistrate continued, "I'm ordering you to do something different. You will complete 60 hours of community service, but not just any service. You'll work with an organization that serves the very community you targeted. You'll serve meals at a community center. You'll help organize after-school programs. You'll sit in meetings where people talk about what it's like to be judged before they even speak." The woman stared, stunned. "You can't make me do that." "I can," the magistrate said calmly. "And I am. Because if you're going to live in this city, in this country, you need to understand the people you share it with, not as stereotypes or threats, but as human beings. If you refuse, you'll face contempt of court, and that will mean jail time." She paused, then added, "And one more thing. That shirt? You won't be taking it back today. It will be held by the court as evidence. When your service is complete, if the organization you work with says you've shown genuine respect and effort, you may request its return. But I suspect by then, you won't want it." The woman sat down slowly, her defiance cracking just a little. Not because she was scared, but because, for the first time, someone had responded not with matching anger, but with a demand for humanity. As the bailiff led her out, the magistrate looked out at the gallery. She saw relief in some faces, curiosity in others. She didn't smile. This wasn't a victory. It was just one small attempt to turn hate into understanding, one stubborn, difficult step at a time. And with that, she called the next case. The courtroom, still quiet, felt a little lighter. Not because the problem was solved, but because, for a moment, justice had chosen compassion over punishment, and that made all the difference. The community center sat on the corner of a busy street, its brick walls covered in bright murals, children holding hands, sunflowers stretching toward the sky, quotes about hope painted in bold, colorful letters. Inside, the air smelled like fresh coffee, floor cleaner, and something warm from the kitchen, maybe cornbread or stew. It was a place where people came not just for help, but for connection. After-school programs, job workshops, food distribution on Fridays. It was a hub for families who'd known hard times but refused to be broken by them. And now, it was where the woman from the courtroom had to show up every Tuesday and Thursday for the next 3 months. She arrived late on her first day, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the ground. She wore plain jeans and a gray hoodie, No slogans, no statements. Just fabric. The court had given her a letter explaining her sentence, but she hadn't read it closely. She figured she'd be scrubbing floors or taking out trash, something mindless, something that let her keep her distance. Instead, a woman with silver-streaked hair and a name tag that read Ms. L greeted her at the front desk with a calm smile. "You must be here for the service program," she said, not unkindly. "Come on back. We've got a group of kids getting ready for homework hour." The woman hesitated. "Kids? I'm not babysitting." "You're not," Ms. L replied. "You're helping. There's a difference." Before she could argue, Ms. L led her down a hallway lined with artwork, drawings of families, self-portraits, maps of dream cities. The sound of laughter and chatter grew louder. Then they stepped into a large room filled with round tables, each surrounded by children between the ages of 8 and 12. Some were already pulling out math worksheets. Others were trading snacks or showing off new sneakers. "Everyone," Ms. L announced. "This is our new volunteer. She'll be helping out this semester." A few kids looked up. One boy squinted. "She the one from the news?" The woman froze. She hadn't realized her courtroom moment had made local headlines. A small article, a blurry photo, but enough for people to recognize her. Ms. L didn't flinch. "What matters isn't where someone's been," she said gently, "but what they're willing to do now. Let's give her a chance." The kids shrugged and went back to their work. Only the boy kept watching her, arms crossed, skeptical. Her first task was simple, pass out pencils and erasers. But her hands felt clumsy, her movements stiff. She avoided eye contact, kept her voice low. When a girl asked for a red pencil, she handed it over without speaking. The silence felt heavy. At one point, the boy from earlier dropped his notebook. Papers scattered. He bent to pick them up, but she knelt too, gathering the sheets without a word. Their fingers brushed as they both reached for the same page, a drawing of a basketball court with 2 stick figures playing. One had a big smile. "Thanks," he mumbled. She nodded, still not looking at him. Later, during a break, Ms. L brought her a cup of coffee. "You don't have to be perfect," she said quietly. "Just be present. Why are you being nice to me?" The woman finally asked, voice rough. "After what I did." "What I wore?" Ms. L sipped her coffee. "Because everyone deserves a path back to their humanity, even the ones who forget they have it." The words sat with her all the way home. Over the next few weeks, something slow and quiet began to shift. She stopped arriving late. She started learning names: Keisha, who loved writing poems; Darnell, who could solve a Rubik's Cube in under a minute; Maya, who always brought extra cookies to share. She noticed things. How Keisha's hands shook when she read aloud. How Darnell stayed late to help clean up. How Maya's mom worked double shifts but never missed a parent-teacher conference. One rainy Thursday, the power went out during homework hour. The room dimmed and the kids groaned. But then someone pulled out a flashlight from their backpack. Another lit a battery-powered lantern. Soon, the tables were glowing with soft light, and the kids started telling stories. Ghost tales, funny family moments, dreams of becoming astronauts or chefs or teachers. The woman sat at the edge of the circle, listening. When it was quiet for a moment, Keisha turned to her. "You ever tell a story?" She shook her head. "Not really." "Try," Darnell said. "It don't gotta be fancy." She hesitated. Then softly, she told them about her grandmother's garden, how she used to grow tomatoes so big they'd split open in the sun, how she'd let neighborhood kids pick strawberries as long as they promised to share with someone who couldn't afford them. The kids listened, wide-eyed. "Your grandma sounds cool," Maya said. "She was," the woman replied, and for the first time in a long time, her voice didn't sound hard. After that day, she started speaking more. She helped Keisha practice reading. She challenged Darnell to chess and lost every time. She even laughed once, really laughed, when Maya tried to teach her a dance move and tripped over her own feet. But it wasn't all easy. One afternoon, a new volunteer walked in. Older, stern-faced. He took one look at her, then pulled Ms. L aside. They spoke in hushed tones. The woman saw the way his eyes narrowed, the way he glanced back at her like she was something dirty. Later, Ms. L found her in the supply closet, organizing paper. "Mr. Ellis recognized you from the news," she said gently. "He's concerned?" "Then let him report me," the woman said, jaw tight. I'm doing what the court ordered. I know, Ms. L said, but fear doesn't disappear just because someone says they've changed. Trust takes time. That night, the woman lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Was she really changing? Or was she just playing a part to get her shirt back and walk away? The thought made her stomach twist. The next week, the community center hosted a family dinner. Parents, kids, volunteers, all gathered in the main hall sharing food from slow cookers and foil trays. The woman brought store-bought cornbread, feeling out of place among the homemade dishes. She sat alone at first, picking at her plate. Then Keisha tugged her sleeve. Come sit with us. At the table, Maya's mom passed her a bowl of greens. You helped Maya with her science project last week? She asked. The woman nodded. She said you stayed late to help her build that volcano, even when it exploded glitter everywhere. It was supposed to be lava, the woman said, almost smiling. Maya's mom studied her for a long moment. Then she said, people make mistakes. What matters is what you do after. No judgment. No lecture. Just a simple truth offered like a gift. Something inside the woman cracked open. Not all at once, but enough to let a little light in. By the 6th week, she started arriving early. She'd help set up chairs, refill the paper towel dispenser, check the printer for jams. She even offered to stay late one night when Ms. L was swamped with grant paperwork. You're not required to do all this, Ms. L said, surprised. I know, the woman replied, but I want to. The real test came during a community discussion night. The topic was safety in our neighborhood. Parents spoke about streetlights that didn't work, sidewalks that ended abruptly, the fear of letting kids walk to the store alone. Then a teenager stood up, tall, nervous, and talked about being followed in stores, about teachers assuming he was trouble before he even opened his mouth. The woman sat very still. She remembered the teens outside the convenience store. She remembered her own words, sharp and cruel. She hadn't seen them as people, just as problems to be shouted at. When the meeting ended, she didn't leave right away. She walked up to the teenager. I'm sorry, she said, voice barely above a whisper. For what I said, for what I believed. He looked at her, surprised. Then he nodded. Just don't do it again. I won't, she said. And for the first time, she meant it. Not because a judge told her to, but because she finally understood why it mattered. Back at the courthouse, the magistrate had been quietly checking in with Ms. L every few weeks, not to spy, but to make sure the arrangement was working. She never asked for details about the woman's behavior. She only asked one question, is she showing up? And every time Ms. L said yes. Now, as the 60 hours drew to a close, the magistrate prepared for the final review. She didn't expect a miracle, but she hoped for a beginning. Meanwhile, the woman folded her gray hoodie and laid it aside. She put on a plain blue shirt. Nothing written on it, just clean fabric. She looked at herself in the mirror. The anger in her eyes was gone. In its place was something quieter, humility maybe, or the start of peace. She didn't know what would happen when she returned to court. But for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of the answer. The morning of her return to court felt different. Not because the sky was clearer or the traffic lighter, but because something inside her had settled. She wore the same plain blue shirt from the mirror that morning. No slogans, no armor, just simple cloth over skin that finally felt like hers again. She walked into the courthouse not with shoulders hunched or eyes darting, but with a quiet step, like someone who'd carried a heavy load for a long time and was ready to set it down. The same courtroom, the same polished benches, the same sunlight cutting through the tall windows. But the air felt lighter, as if the walls themselves remembered what had happened here weeks ago and were holding their breath again. Not in tension, but in hope. She sat in the same seat as before, but this time her hands rested calmly in her lap. No balled-up shirt, no defiance, just stillness. The magistrate entered a few minutes later, robe flowing, expression unreadable. She nodded to the clerk, then looked directly at the woman. No surprise, no judgment, just a steady gaze that seemed to say, I see you. Before we begin, the magistrate said, I'd like to hear from you. Not as a defendant, just as a person. How was your time at the community center? The woman took a breath. Her voice didn't shake, but it was soft, like she was handling something fragile. Hard, she said. At first. I didn't think I belonged there. I thought they'd hate me. And some did at first, but they gave me a chance anyway. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I met kids who work harder before breakfast than I do all day. Parents who stretch one meal into 3. Volunteers who show up rain or shine just to make sure someone feels seen. I thought I was going there to do time, but I ended up learning more than I ever did in school. A few people in the gallery shifted, some wiping their eyes. Even the prosecutor looked up from his notes. I used to think certain people were less, she continued, her voice catching just slightly, that they caused their own problems, that they didn't try. But that's not true. They try harder than most. They just don't have the same starting line. She looked down at her hands. I wore that shirt because I was angry. At my life, at my mistakes, at everything that felt out of control. But instead of fixing myself, I blamed others. And that hurt people. Real people. Not ideas. Not groups. Kids who just wanted to buy candy after school. Silence filled the room. Not the heavy kind from before, but a thoughtful quiet. The kind that comes when truth lands softly. The magistrate nodded slowly. And now? Now I know better, she said. Not because a judge told me to, but because I saw it, felt it, lived it for a little while. At that moment, the bailiff handed the magistrate a sealed envelope. It was from the community center. Inside was a letter signed by Ms. L. and 3 of the regular volunteers, including Maya's mom and the teenager who'd spoken at the safety meeting. They wrote that the woman had shown up every scheduled day, stayed late when asked, listened more than she spoke, and, most importantly, treated every person with growing respect. They didn't say she was perfect, but they said she was trying, and that mattered. The magistrate read the letter silently, then folded it carefully. She turned to the woman. You've completed your 60 hours. The court considers your sentence fulfilled. A murmur went through the room. That was it? No fine? No warning? No dramatic punishment? But then the magistrate added something unexpected. However, I'd like to offer you a choice. The woman looked up, confused. You can walk out of here today and never look back. Or, she paused. You can come back, not as a defendant, but as a volunteer. The community center has agreed to let you continue helping if you're willing. Not because the court requires it, but because they believe you might actually want to. The woman blinked. She hadn't expected that. She'd prepared for judgment, maybe even shame, but not an invitation. Why would they? She started. Because change is rare, the magistrate said gently. But when it's real, it's worth protecting. She thought about Keisha's poems, Darnell's chess games, the way Maya's mom had passed her the greens without a second thought. She thought about the night the power went out and they told stories by flashlight. She thought about the teenager who'd accepted her apology with just a nod and a, "Don't do it again." She wasn't the same person who'd walked in here weeks ago in that hateful shirt. And she didn't want to be. I'll come back, she said, voice firm now, if they'll have me. The magistrate gave the smallest smile, just a lift at the corners of her mouth. They will. Then, in a move that surprised everyone, the magistrate stood and walked down from the bench. She didn't approach the defendant's table. Courtroom rules still mattered. But she stopped at the edge of the aisle, close enough to speak without raising her voice. I won't pretend the world is fixed, she said quietly, so only the woman and maybe the front row could hear. But you just proved that one person can choose to be part of the repair. That's more powerful than you know. She returned to the bench, sat down, and closed the file. Case dismissed with successful completion of court-ordered service. Court stands adjourned. As people began to file out, the woman remained seated for a moment, absorbing it all. She didn't feel victorious. She felt responsible, like she'd been handed something precious and fragile, a second chance, and now it was up to her to hold it gently. Outside, the sun was warm on her face. She didn't rush to leave. Instead, she walked slowly toward the bus stop, passing a group of kids laughing near the courthouse steps. One of them glanced at her, then did a double take. Hey, the boy said, aren't you the one from the center? She nodded. Yeah, that's me. You coming back Thursday? He asked. I am, she said. Good, he said with a grin. Darnell says he's going to beat you at chess again. She laughed, really laughed, and for the first time, it didn't feel strange coming from her. Over the next few weeks, she did return. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She helped organize a book drive. She stayed late to tutor kids struggling with fractions. She even started bringing homemade cornbread. Her grandmother's recipe, the one she'd told the kids about during the blackout. One afternoon, Ms. L pulled her aside. "There's a new family just moved in from out of state," she said. "Single mom, 2 kids. They don't know anyone. Scared to ask for help," I thought. "Maybe you could check in on them? Just bring over a welcome basket, show them where the bus stop is." The woman hesitated. "Why me?" "Because you know what it's like to feel like you don't belong," Ms. L said simply. "And you found your way back. Maybe you can help them find theirs," so she did. She knocked on the door of a small apartment above a laundromat, holding a basket with fruit, soap, school supplies, and a note with the community center's hours. The woman who answered looked exhausted, wary, but when she saw the basket and the gentle smile, her shoulders relaxed just a little. "Thank you," she whispered. "No problem," the woman said. "I've been where you are. It gets better." It wasn't a grand speech, it wasn't a headline, but it was real. Back at the courthouse, the magistrate heard bits and pieces through quiet updates. She never sought praise. She didn't need to. She'd seen enough in that first courtroom moment to know that real justice wasn't always about punishment. It was about creating space for people to become who they were meant to be. One evening, as she packed up her briefcase, her clerk asked, "Do you ever wonder if it sticks? If people really change?" She looked out the window at the city lights flickering on. "I don't have to wonder," she said. "I saw it happen." And somewhere across town, a woman who once wore hate on her chest now carried groceries for a stranger, listened to a child's poem, and remembered every day that kindness isn't weakness. It's the hardest, bravest thing of all. The story wasn't over, but the turning point had passed. And sometimes that's enough to change everything. Months had passed since that day in court, and the rhythm of life at the community center had settled into something steady, almost comforting. The woman no longer showed up just on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She came whenever she was needed. Sometimes it was to help sort donated clothes before the weekend giveaway. Other times it was to sit with a teenager who'd had a rough day at school and just needed someone to listen without fixing or judging. She'd even started showing up early on Saturdays to help set up for the free breakfast program, tying on an apron like it was the most natural thing in the world. People didn't call her the woman from court anymore. They just called her by her first name, quietly, respectfully, like she'd earned the right to be known. One rainy afternoon, Ms. L asked her to help with a new project, a storytelling night for adults. Not kids this time, but parents, elders, neighbors, anyone who wanted to share a piece of their life. "We're calling it Voices of the Block," Ms. L said, handing her a stack of flyers. "People forget how powerful it is to be heard, especially when life's been loud in all the wrong ways." The woman hesitated. "You want me to tell my story?" "Only if you're ready," Ms. L said. "But someone like you, someone who's walked through fire and come out changed, that kind of truth can light a path for others." She wasn't sure. The thought of standing in front of a room full of people, many of whom might remember the news clip or the whispers, made her stomach twist. But then she thought about the teenager who'd accepted her apology with just a nod. About Keisha, who now slipped poems into her bag when she wasn't looking. About the single mom she'd helped move in, who now brought her extra tamales every Sunday. Maybe her story wasn't just hers anymore. Maybe it belonged to anyone who'd ever felt too far gone to come back, so she said yes. The night of the event, the center's main hall was packed. Folding chairs lined the room, mismatched but clean. Candles flickered on tables, and the smell of coffee and cinnamon filled the air. People chatted softly, some holding hands, others clutching worn notebooks. The woman sat in the back, heart pounding, until Ms. L gently guided her to the front. "You don't have to be perfect," she whispered again, like she had on that very first day. "Just be honest." When it was her turn, she walked to the small wooden stool at the front. No podium, no microphone, just her voice and the quiet attention of the room. She didn't start with the shirt. She started with loneliness. "I used to think I was the only one hurting," she began, voice low but clear. "Lost my job, then my apartment. Felt like the world kept slamming doors in my face. Instead of asking for help, I got angry. And I aimed that anger at people I didn't even know. Just because they looked different, lived different, seemed easier to blame." She paused, swallowing hard. "I wore that shirt because I thought it made me strong. Like I was taking control, but really I was just hiding. Hiding from my own shame, my own failures. And I hurt people who didn't deserve it. Kids even. A few people nodded. Others wiped their eyes. Then a judge, someone I expected to punish me, gave me a different kind of sentence. She sent me here, not to suffer but to see, and what I saw broke me open, not in a bad way, in the way a seed cracks open so it can grow. She told them about the blackout night, about Darnell's chess games, about Maya's mom passing her the greens. They didn't have to trust me, but they did. And that trust, it taught me how to trust myself again, not the angry version of me, the one underneath, the one who still knew right from wrong even if I'd forgotten for a while. When she finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Then slowly someone started clapping. Then another. Soon the whole room was applauding, not loudly but warmly, like they were saying, "Whoa, we see you. We've been there too." Afterward, a man in his 60s approached her. His hands were rough, his eyes tired. "My son," he said quietly. "He's got hate in his heart right now. Thinks the world owes him something. I don't know how to reach him." He looked at her, searching. "Do you think there's still hope for him?" She met his gaze. "There's always hope," she said. "But sometimes it starts with someone giving him a place to be seen, not for his anger, but for the pain behind it." He nodded, tears in his eyes, and walked away without another word. That night, as she walked home under streetlights glistening on wet pavement, she realized something. She wasn't just healing herself anymore. She was becoming part of something bigger, a chain of kindness, of second chances, of people choosing to believe in each other even when it's hard. Back at the courthouse, the magistrate had heard about the storytelling night. She didn't attend. Her role was behind the bench, not in the audience, but Ms. L sent her a note the next day. Just 2 lines, she spoke. They listened. It mattered. The magistrate tucked the note into her desk drawer next to the letter from the community center. She didn't keep them as trophies. She kept them as reminders, proof that the law could be more than rules and penalties. It could be a doorway. A few weeks later, the magistrate received a request, not from a lawyer or a defendant, but from the city's youth outreach program. They were launching a new initiative. Courts and community conversations, monthly gatherings where judges, officers, and residents could talk openly about justice, fear, and trust. They wanted her to lead it, she agreed, but with one condition. "I want someone else at the table," she said. "Someone who's been on both sides." They knew exactly who she meant. So one Saturday morning, the woman found herself sitting at a long table in the courthouse's community room, not in the defendant's seat but as a guest. Across from her were teenagers, parents, a few police officers, and the magistrate. The topic that day: what does fairness really look like? At first she stayed quiet, listening as others spoke about being followed in stores, about not trusting the system, about feeling invisible. Then a young girl, maybe 14, said, "How do we know the court really cares about us? It feels like it's built for other people." All eyes turned to the magistrate, but before she could answer, the woman spoke. "I used to think the court was just a place to get punished," she said, "but I learned it can also be a place to be seen, not just for what you did wrong, but for who you could become. That only happens, though, if the people in charge are willing to look past the surface." She looked at the magistrate. She saw me. Not the shirt, not the anger. Me. The magistrate didn't smile, but her eyes softened. "And you showed up," she said simply. "That's what made the difference." After the meeting, one of the officers approached the woman. "I've arrested people like you before," he admitted. "Never thought about what came after the cuffs came off. Now you know," she said. "There's always an after." As the weeks turned into months, the conversations grew. More people came. More stories were shared. The woman became a regular, not as a symbol, but as a steady presence, someone who listened more than she spoke, but spoke with weight when she did. One evening, as she helped clean up after a session, the magistrate stayed behind too. They stood by the window watching the sunset paint the city in gold and purple. "You've changed more than just your own life," the magistrate said quietly. "I didn't do it alone," the woman replied. "You gave me a chance when no one else would." "No," the magistrate said. "I gave you a direction. You walked the path yourself." They stood in silence for a while. 2 very different women bound by a single moment that refused to stay in the past. Later that night, the woman stopped by the community center one last time before heading home. The lights were off, but she had a key now, trusted to lock up after late meetings. As she turned the deadbolt, she glanced back at the mural on the wall, children holding hands beneath a sky full of stars. She smiled. Not because everything was fixed. She knew the world was still messy, still unfair in places, but because she finally understood her part in it. Not to fix everything, just to show up, to listen, to try, and sometimes that was enough to change the whole story. A full year had passed since the day she walked into that courtroom wearing hate on her chest. Now she stood outside the same courthouse, not as a defendant, not as a volunteer, but as someone invited to speak at a small ceremony. The city had launched a new program called Pathways to Understanding, a partnership between the courts, schools, and community centers aimed at turning conflict into connection. And they wanted her to share her story, not as a warning, but as a witness. She wore a simple dress, soft blue like the shirt she'd worn on her return to court. No slogans, no armor, just her, standing in the light. Inside, the room wasn't the main courtroom this time, but a smaller chamber usually used for mediation. Folding chairs were arranged in a circle, not rows, no one above, no one below. Just people. The magistrate sat among them, robe off, in a plain blouse and slacks. Ms. L was there too, along with a few of the kids from the center, now a little taller, a little more confident. Even the teenager who'd once looked at her with suspicion now nodded at her like an old friend. When it was her turn to speak, she didn't stand. She stayed seated, hands folded in her lap. "I'm not here because I'm special," she began. "I'm here because I was lost and someone refused to let me stay that way." She told them how it felt to wake up every morning angry at the world, how she used to think kindness was weakness, how she believed people got what they deserved, good or bad, without ever asking what they'd been through. "I thought I was protecting myself," she said. "But really I was just building walls so high I couldn't see anyone else, and they couldn't see me." Then she talked about the shift, the slow, quiet unraveling of her old beliefs, not from a lecture or a punishment, but from a bowl of greens passed across a table, from a child trusting her with a secret poem, from a judge who saw not just the crime, but the person behind it. "I didn't change overnight," she admitted. "Some days I still wanted to shut down. Some days I still felt ashamed. But showing up, even when it was hard, that's what kept me honest." After she finished, a young man raised his hand. He looked to be in his early 20s, eyes tired but curious. "What if someone doesn't want to change?" he asked. "What if they like being angry?" She thought for a moment. "I liked it too," she said. Anger felt strong, but it's lonely. And deep down, I think most people don't really want to be alone. They just don't know how to reach out without looking weak. She looked around the circle. Change doesn't start with big speeches. It starts with someone offering you a pencil when you drop yours, or asking how your day was, and really listening to the answer. The magistrate spoke next. She didn't talk about laws or rulings. She talked about hope. "For years I believed my job was to enforce justice," she said. "But I've learned it's also to create space for it to grow. Sometimes that means a sentence. Sometimes it means a second chance. Always it means seeing people as more than their worst moment." The room fell into a comfortable silence. Not the kind that needs filling, but the kind that holds space for reflection. Later that afternoon, as people milled about sharing coffee and cookies, the woman found herself standing near the courthouse steps with Ms. L. "You've come a long way," Ms. L said, handing her a small envelope. "What's this?" she asked. "A letter. From the kids. They wrote it together." She opened it carefully. Inside, on bright construction paper, were messages in different handwriting. "Thank you for helping me with my math. You never made me feel dumb. You're the only grown-up who asked what I wanted to be when I grow up. I used to think all adults were mad at us. You showed me that's not true." At the bottom, in careful block letters, "We're proud of you." She folded the letter slowly, tears welling but not falling. "I didn't do much," she whispered. "You showed up," Ms. L said. "That's everything." That evening, she didn't go straight home. Instead, she walked to the community center one last time. Not because she had to, but because it felt like home now. The lights were on. Laughter spilled from the open windows. She stepped inside and found Keisha at a table editing a poem with red pen. "You're late," Keisha teased. "Just had a meeting," she said, pulling up a chair. "About saving the world?" Darnell called from across the room, setting up chessboards. "Something like that," she smiled. She stayed for hours, helping Maya with a science poster, listening to a new volunteer share her own story of loss and recovery, even playing a game of chess and finally winning one to Darnell's mock outrage. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't headline-worthy, but it was real, and it was hers. As she locked up the center later that night, she paused under the streetlight, looking back at the mural, the children holding hands, the sunflowers, the words painted in bold, "We rise together." She thought about the shirt she'd worn all those months ago. The court had kept it as promised. She'd never asked for it back. Not because she was afraid, but because she no longer needed it. That version of her was gone, not erased, but transformed, like clay reshaped by patient hands. Back at the courthouse, the magistrate sat alone in her chambers reviewing the final report on the Pathways program. Numbers showed reduced repeat offenses, increased community trust, more volunteers stepping forward. But the real success wasn't in the data. It was in the quiet moments. A teenager shaking a judge's hand, a former defendant tutoring a child, a room full of strangers becoming neighbors. She closed the file and turned off the lamp. Outside, the city hummed with life. Messy, complicated, beautiful life. She walked out into the night, not as a figure of authority, but as a person who'd learned that justice isn't just about what's fair, it's about what's possible. Weeks later, the woman received a different kind of letter, not from the court, but from the single mom she'd helped move in. Inside was a photo, the two kids smiling in front of their school, holding handmade signs that read "Future Doctor" and "Future Teacher." On the back, in careful script, "Thank you for seeing us when we felt invisible." She taped the photo to her fridge, right next to Keisha's latest poem. Life didn't become perfect. There were still hard days, bills that didn't add up, memories that surfaced uninvited, moments of doubt. But now, when the old anger tried to creep back in, she knew what to do. She reached out. She showed up. She listened, and in doing so, she found something she never knew she was missing. Not just forgiveness from others, but peace within herself. One spring morning, she stood at the bus stop near the courthouse, waiting to head to the center for the weekly breakfast prep. A young woman approached, eyes red from crying, clutching a crumpled court summons. "You okay?" the woman asked gently. The young woman shook her head. "I messed up big time. I don't know what to do." The woman didn't offer advice. She just stood beside her, quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Whatever it is, it's not the end of your story." The young woman looked up, surprised. "I know," the woman said softly, "because mine wasn't either." And as the bus pulled up, she didn't just get on alone. She held the door open, and together they stepped forward, into a day that hadn't been written yet, full of chances neither of them had expected, but both now believed in.